Today we're going to be looking at the configuration options for the Windows CE.NET emulator. So I've built an image of Windows CE.NET 4.2 which I want to download and boot into the emulation environment. In order to do this, what I need to do is configure the download options, and this is handled through the Target menu. So if I select Target and Configure Remote Connection, you can see that here are the configuration options for both download and also the kernel transport. These are by default set to none, so I don't have a download transport or a kernel transport configured. If I click on the download option, you can see that there are a number of options displayed here. First of all, none, which is the default option. I could also select the emulator 4.2 to be my download device, or I could select Ethernet and serial. One thing to note here is that this list is extensible by making use of something called EXDI, or the extended debug interface. We can plug in additional download and debug transports beyond the ones that are listed here. In this case, I'm going to select emulator for the download transport and also select emulator for the kernel transport. You'll notice that once the download and kernel transports have been configured, that we have some additional options which can be enabled through the configure button to the right of the download transport. If I click on the configure button, this will bring up an additional dialog which gives me the ability to set various configuration options for the emulator. Now by default, the emulation environment will download into a window which is 800 by 600 pixels and with a 16 bits per pixel color depth. Because we're running the screen at 800 by 600, that means that the emulation image would totally fill the screen. One of the nice features of the emulator is that we can make use of something called skins. So I'll just swap over from having the 800 by 600 screen resolution to instead choose a skin file. Once I have the skin file selected, I can simply browse to a number of available skin files that ship with Windows CE.NET, including Internet Phone, Media Player, PDA, WebPad, and so on. In this case, I'm going to select the WebPad skin and click on Open. Now, skin files are very simple to create. It's one XML file and 3 bitmaps, one that shows the default state of buttons on the skin, one that shows an up state, and one that shows a down state of those buttons. So it's very easy to create your own skins. We can also set the memory available to the emulation environment. In this case, I have 64 meg of RAM configured for the emulator. Now, in terms of making use of both networking and because the emulation environment is running on my desktop PC, I may also want to make use of some of the peripherals that are configured on that machine. So by default, we have the ability to use outgoing networking. So this, of course, gives me the ability to run applications such as Internet Explorer and browse out to websites from the Internet Explorer that's running inside of Windows CE. Of course, one of the neat features about Windows CE.NET is the emulation environment also supports inbound connections. So instead of making use of NAT, which is outbound only, I can select the virtual switch. In effect, what this gives me is an IP address for the emulator that's running on my desktop PC. Now, why would I want to do this? In situations where perhaps I have the HTTP web server running on my Windows CE emulation environment, or maybe even an XML web service that's running inside of the emulation environment, this gives me the ability to have external devices on the network connect up to my Windows CE emulation environment and make use of the resources within the emulator. I may have some peripherals that I want to make use of inside of emulation. Maybe I have an external GPS device that is feeding a signal into my desktop PC, and I can also make use of that directly inside of the emulation environment and have a device driver that is reading data directly from that external device. So we can make a pass-through connection directly with serial port 1, serial port 2, or the parallel port inside of the emulation environment. Now at this point, I've set the skin file, I've set the amount of memory that I have available for the emulator, I've set my networking options, and the communication pass-through defaults are fine. So I can simply click on OK. Click on OK to finish the Configure Remote Connection dialog, and then I'm ready to download. And downloading the operating system is just like downloading to a physical hardware reference board. I simply click on Target, and download. We'll get the download status dialog being displayed. Once downloading is complete, we should see the emulator start, and you can see the skin there. You notice that we have a security warning dialog being displayed, and this is a KITL, or Kernel Independent Transport Layer security warning. And this is simply saying that if I click on the yes button, that the emulation environment is going to have access to certain folders on my desktop machine. Now, once the emulation environment is booted, I'll show you what that means. So I'm just going to click on yes and allow the emulator to continue booting. This will take a second or so to boot. Okay, so here's the emulator environment. You can see that we have various icons being displayed on the desktop for this image of Windows CE. If I browse to my computer, this will show me each of the folders that are exposed in the operating system image that I've created. One of these folders is marked as release. Now, this is a shared folder between the desktop PC. This is my build release folder, or sometimes known as flat release folder for Windows CE. But this is also exposed inside of the emulation environment. So any files that I drop into here from my desktop machine will be available to the emulator. And also any files that I drop into this folder from my emulation environment will also be available to my desktop PC. That ends this demonstration. Thanks for watching.